In the wake of the 2024 election, New Yorkers have been processing the results of a shifting political landscape and the potential effects on some of the most pressing issues in the city. All of this comes ahead of the 2025 election for New York City mayor. What's happened and what's to come? We'll talk it all through with reporters on the city's front lines on this episode of Your Voice Matters. I'm joined by Rachel Holliday Smith, Katie Honan, and Jonathan Custodio. Let's start with what was on voters' minds. What was the important things that drove people to the polls in the first place? I mean, was it reflection of what was happening nationally? Was it something a little different for New York? Let me start with you, Katie.
I think what you see in New York City is the national issues and how we are feeling them and how voters are seeing them here in New York City. Public safety, immigration, and ultimately it was affordability from voters. They had concerns about how they were going to continue to living in one of the most expensive cities in the country. And I think that they selected their presidential picks based on that and who they thought could address those needs better.
Also, what we saw is that there was a real lack of reason for Democrats to go to the polls rather than folks who were supporting Trump. So there wasn't much on the ballot for Dems to get excited about other than the presidential race. So as our reporting showed and reporting showed elsewhere, there was just such a huge drop in Democratic turnout, but there was real enthusiasm from folks who were supporting Trump. Huge housing costs, I think, were on a lot of people's minds. I saw an analysis, not from our newsroom, but from others, that showed that the counties in the tri-state area that had the highest housing costs were the ones that shifted the most to Trump. So I'm sure that was on people's minds. So it was just a real enthusiastic push towards Trump and a sort of lack of the same on the Democratic side.
Jonathan, your beat is the boogie down Bronx, as we like to say. And the Bronx was one of the places that people saw an actual shift to the political right. What were you hearing that, maybe made it less of a surprise for you on election night than a lot of others?
Well, definitely echoing Katie and Rachel's points on affordability and cost of living. I think I lost track how many times people were telling me about their grocery prices. Affordability was definitely a lot of people's minds. People also talked a lot about public safety. They felt like, maybe they couldn't ride the subway. Maybe they were definitely listened to a lot of the talking points from even our mayor at times and other people who would say, the city is not safe in some cases. So I think that was definitely on people's minds. And, I also like what Rachel said, there are a lot of Democrats who didn't turn out. And some of that was because they assumed that New York would be blue. And they're right. But for the ones that did, many of them turned out for Proposition 1. They really wanted to enshrine those protected rights, particularly reproductive rights. And a lot of them were also excited about potentially seeing the first woman president, the first Black woman president.
Jonathan, stay with you for a second. The Bronx is famously a large population of people of color, of immigrants. When President-elect Trump made immigration one of the kind of keys of his campaign, how did that resonate with voters in the Bronx?
A lot of immigrants who settle in the Bronx sometimes will separate themselves from the ones who are kind of on their way here, most recently arrived, and say that, maybe they did it, quote unquote, the right way, or they did it legally, or they got their visa. So they support kind of more stern immigration enforcement. Sometimes they'll say, well, we got here, we're good. We don't need any more people here as well. There are others who are second generation as well, and they have parents who immigrated here that help give them an opportunity to have what they see as a better life. And so they're very in support of pro-immigration policies and welcoming a lot of people there. But, in addition to that, like I said, people who come here want to separate themselves a little bit sometimes. They'll often draw this line of like, we think he's going to separate. We think Trump will separate the criminals, quote unquote, the people with the quote unquote criminal records. And we're not that, we're the ones who are just trying to work here and have jobs.
Rachel, coming to you for a second, the the proposals that were on the ballot. I mean, I think this, people forget that there are actually local issues when you go to the polls. It's not just the president that you're voting for. How did those do? And why were they important to how the city functions?
There were 6 on the ballot for people in the 5 boroughs in New York City, but if you were in the rest of New York State, there was at least one, which was a statewide proposal that passed. All of them passed except one, interestingly. The other 5, other than the statewide proposal, were specifically to do with how government works in New York City. They could seem a little bit specific and small potatoes, perhaps, to voters. They had to do with how, the sanitation department functions, this idea of a diversity office, some really specific things. The interesting story behind those is sort of how they came together. These 5 city-level proposals were created by a commission put together by Mayor Eric Adams, some really loyal people to him. It came together in just a few months over this past summer. There was controversy because the city council really did not like these. They said it was a power grab. They said that this was a rushed process. But we saw that all of them except one, the last one, the 6th proposal, passed. The critics obviously didn't make their message heard enough. There was a pretty solid opposition to this. There were mailers sent out. The city councilor members said, don't vote for this. They said yes on one and no on the rest, because they said this is essentially a way for the mayor to take more power. There was some thought, myself and others in the newsroom, that riding kind of the feeling right now that Mayor Eric Adams is not a popular mayor and is in so much trouble just because of the federal investigations surrounding him and others in his administration, that this would fail just because people are feeling really badly about him. But that's not true. I will say that's not entirely surprising. There's a lot of evidence that in general, people do vote for ballot proposals. In general, like this is, throughout history in New York State, the majority of ballot proposals just get accepted, mostly because they usually sound pretty common sense okay. And people say, oh yeah, that sounds like something I would support. So perhaps that is what happened here. The language of these proposals was, you would read them and think, well, this is non-controversial, I'm going to vote for this, without knowing the context. So if you hadn't known about the way these appeared on the ballot and how they got there, you may just say, yeah, sure, I'm going to vote for this. It's going to change the way some of our systems function and give a bit more power to City Hall and the mayor rather than city council or the process by which things get reviewed through that body. And Katie can actually speak more to that because she covers City Hall and City Council.
Yeah, so Katie, do these proposals help the mayor?
Yeah, I think it gives his branch of government more power on certain things. One of the proposals gives the Department of Sanitation more jurisdiction over what it can clean. Currently, if there's a mess in a park, whatever it is, litter or anything, the Parks Department has to clean that up. Now, under these proposals, sanitation can come in. I know some critics feared that this would just be used to do mass sweeps, to clean up vendors. One of the things he's done as mayor, really cleaned up illegal vending in parks and on streets and sidewalks. And I think, too, we're constantly looking at this power clash between the mayor and the city council, whether it's bills they pass and he doesn't like, initiatives he starts that they don't like. And a number of city council members have called for the mayor to resign. So I think they were hoping, obviously if these proposals didn't pass, it would be another blow to the mayor in this kind of tit for tat power struggle. But I think, if we're kind of viewing them as wins and losses on a board, I think this is a win for the mayor in terms of that constant back and forth with, they share a building, but they're often at odds over a number of issues.
I wonder, given the number of investigations that are happening to members of City Hall and the mayor himself, I mean, where are New Yorkers right now on how they feel about not just his job approval, but whether they think this is going to influence him? I don't know, Jonathan, if you've heard from people in the Bronx about this, or Rachel, if you want to jump in.
In the Bronx, I went to Wakefield, which is the most part section of the Bronx. I went to Harlem. I went to St. Albans and Queens. All these are, kind of black strongholds that would expectedly vote for Adams again or voted for Adams last time. And, things were a little split. Some people felt that it was a bit of a witch hunt against him. Some people questioned why these investigations were coming up now as he's seeking re-election, and they supported his advocacy for public safety. Others felt that he had done a terrible job, and they thought he was guilty of alleged wrongdoing, and they wanted to see him resign, or at least sort of own up to what he had done and like try to do a better job. So it was a bit mixed in those kinds of areas, and I think you saw a lot of this disparity in age. A lot of the older Black voters were shifting more to support him, whereas some who were maybe in their 30s or 40s were a little more opposed.
His approval numbers are just incredibly low, but I can say that, New Yorkers, at least the ones answering pollsters' calls, are pretty displeased with the mayor. And certainly there is very much blood in the water in terms of politics. I mean, there are so many people who've come out, politicians who've come out and said that they want to run against Eric Adams and primary him and try to see him not get reelected. So it's a tough time for him politically. I think also a lot of folks are taking note that in the last couple of weeks in the run up to the presidential election, there was this interesting interplay between him and Donald Trump, where they, were kind of looking at each other across the room and say, almost in this friendly way, aligning themselves with each other. And Eric Adams took a long time to say that he was voting for Kamala Harris, for example. There's a very loyal Trump person on the legal team for Eric Adams. That's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out as Trump actually takes office again, and Eric Adams is going into what's going to be a very long and bruising, I think, primary season. And let's not forget about his trial that's scheduled for next spring, too. So it's going to be busy.
I know this is still a year out, but at this point, people have to be positioning themselves to try to figure out where they're going to get their campaign money from, what boroughs are, most vulnerable, et cetera. Are there any clear frontrunners yet?
I think in terms of frontrunners, there's been some polling, and I like to look at, obviously name recognition and money is what you need at this stage in the game. Assemblymember Zoran Mamdani had recently announced he was running, and he's a Democratic Socialist, and he raised a significant amount in his first 3 weeks of announcing. You have former comptroller Scott Stringer, who ran in 2021 and lost, current comptroller Brad Lander, State Senator Jessica Ramos from Queens, someone who actually was a lawyer for the firefighters who accused the city of sort of having favors to the Turkish government. He's running. So there's a number of people running. I think a lot of people were waiting until after the presidential election to see the field and how it is. But even though June, which is when the primary is it feels like a long time until we're actually going to vote. It's not. And I think once we get matching funds, obviously the city has a very generous matching funds program, which will contribute a lot. We've written at the city about a lot of issues with the matching fund program when it came to what the mayor was getting in 2021. But yeah, I think anything can change week to week.
Katie, are there other shoes expected to drop in the investigations into Mayor Adams, right? I mean, given that the people that Jonathan's speaking with, some of them feel like, okay, this is a witch hunt. Why is the timing now? But is there kind of momentum building for more to be revealed?
I sadly do not have the full insight into the various law enforcement agencies nationally and in the city. But I will say, when you look at the number of people from the administration who had phones and other electronics seized from their homes, they haven't been arrested yet, and they don't seem to be implicated in what the mayor is accused of. So you have Schools Chancellor David Banks, former First Deputy Mayor Sheena Ray, Philip Beggs, who was a Deputy Mayor for Public Safety, Winnie Greco, who was the Mayor's Asian Affairs Liaison, Timothy Pearson, Edward Caban. These people worked in the administration and their homes were raided, and they don't seem to be involved at all in the Turkey investigation. So I think there's been a lot of anticipation for what's going to happen with them. Why did you raid Winnie Greco's homes in the Bronx last February? Why did you raid Tim Pearson's home on Long Island? That kind of thing. So we're all kind of waiting. I think people anticipate, and there's been reporting, and the mayor appearing to be cozying up to now President-elect President Trump, who has said multiple times that he believes this is a witch hunt against the mayor because of him speaking out against the asylum seeker crisis and New York's share of it. There was speculation that the mayor is now hopeful that with a new president, we'll have new attorney generals and new U.S. attorneys, and maybe there'll be changes. I asked the mayor last week, are you hopeful that President-elect Trump will alter this investigation of yours? He didn't respond, but I think it's worth keeping in mind as we go into January and we swear in a new president, what we anticipated happening before the election and what's going to happen now.
What are some potential outcomes, especially to Randall's Island, which has a very large number of kind of migrants kind of in stasis or in holding right now, given that we have this significant shift in the administration in DC and how they plan to carry out one of their campaign interests, which is mass deportation and decreasing the number of people who are here.
We just don't know. And our amazing colleague, Gwen Hogan, has done a ton of reporting on the migrant crisis. She's a wonderful reporter. And, she spoke to folks, migrants in the lead up to the election, and they were waiting, just terrified about what will happen. I don't know. I mean, I've wondered myself, will we see some sort of shift in population, maybe fewer people trying to come into the US, or perhaps even people, trying to leave or leave places where they think they might be targeted. I've written with Gwen, stories about what it actually means to be a sanctuary city, the limits to that. It's not a sort of legally enforceable thing. It's just a sort of a tradition and a concept. It's really going to be put to the test in these next 4 years as the federal government, comes down and starts bringing action against these folks, and local and state authorities will have to respond to that. But I don't know what's going to happen. I do know from our reporting that, if that occurs where many, many people are deported or even threatened to be deported, it'll have an absolutely massive effect on the economy of New York City. Our great colleague, Greg David, has done a lot of reporting on the economic impact of a lot of things in New York, including immigration. And, 7% of workers in New York City are undocumented by some estimates. So that's just an enormous part of our workforce. If actions or even threats of action start to happen, it's just going to be really, really, really hard.
Katie, does the mayor say anything about that? I mean, given that this is a significant percentage of the workforce and how the administration could carry out their interests here?
Last week after the election, he gathered the head of the mayor's office of immigrant affairs and took a lot of questions about the fear of deportation, the fear of what the president-elect has said is going to happen. His take right after the election was, I don't want to freak anyone out. The mayor himself has said very little about the immigrant community here in New York City. He said in a recent television interview that he's against mass deportations, but he's also against, quote, saturation. He's long been critical of the national government and the lack of funding that the city, and not just New York City, but cities across the country, Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, has received in support of the asylum seeker crisis, which he says is a national issue. But looking at what he himself has said, it is a much different tone than what we heard when former Mayor Bill de Blasio was in office, when Donald Trump was elected the first time. It's certainly not this strong support of the immigrant community and vowing to do whatever it takes. He's been asked directly multiple times, what are you going to do? And what reporters have been told is we're reviewing the legality. He's been critical of the sanctuary city status, especially when it comes to undocumented immigrants who commit crimes. So looking at what the mayor is going to do, we're not sure yet because he hasn't told us. We've asked repeatedly. And I think a lot of people living here in the city, they themselves are afraid. It's not the reporters making them afraid, asking on their behalf or on anyone's behalf of what's going to happen. So I think every single week we're going to see the mayor. It seems like he's waffled a bit on exactly what he wants to do for the people living here in the city.
Jonathan, is that a fear that you hear or heard among voters and among citizens here?
I come across a lot of folks who they bring up the issue of, they kind of echo some of the same comments the mayor has made about migrants, about resources, and that kind of being split because of them. And some of them have expressed to me they feel like they've sort of been skipped in the line, so to speak. So, they say, some of them will say, hey, I've been waiting for, 2-3 years to get off this Section 8 housing waiting list. And I'm hearing that these migrants got housing, as soon as they got here. Or these sort of migrant credit cards or debit cards program that the mayor had. They were expressing frustration with that. I need money too. Like we've talked about before, going back to the cost of living issues. So that's definitely a frustration I've heard from voters.
I'll also add that, if I may just interject, Jonathan, you talked to a man whose quote really stuck out to me in one of the stories we did post-election about how people were feeling, who was a man who told you that he was undocumented. He worked at as a butcher for several years, I believe in the Bronx, correct me if I'm wrong, but, he said, I'm not worried about myself. I'm paraphrasing, but, I think that Trump is going to just make people go back who are criminals. He was basically said, this won't happen to me. I'm not worried about myself, which very much remains to be seen. And it made me a bit fearful to read that quote for him.
Right, absolutely. And it goes back to immigrants separating themselves. That person had been here for about 4 years, immigrated from Mexico, like Sarah Rachel worked in a butcher shop. And he absolutely felt like, hey, this is not going to affect me. I'm different. And I think, someone like Trump will recognize that. And while he acknowledged that he liked Kamala Harris as a candidate, similarly, because he thought she would be hard on immigration as well, he thought Trump, he said he would have voted for Trump if he had the right to vote.
One of the issues that I hear from New Yorkers, more from drivers than people who take public transit, is the upcoming tolls, the congestion pricing that is scheduled to come into effect in the city. As we are having this conversation, there are plans to bring out a toll at a lower rate than it was initially proposed at. The governor of New York initially rejected the idea, and now it might come back at $9 and eventually go up to $15, right? But I wonder, as you look across like how this affects just city politics, state government, MTA funding, and just old-fashioned transit, how people get into and out of, it just seems like something that will absolutely affect what New York City looks like, at least the roads look like, in a matter of months to a year. So, Rachel, let me start with you.
Yeah, there's so many things I could say about this whole mess of congestion pricing. But what I'll say is I find it just remarkable that, yes, as you said, we're taping this and Governor Kathy Hochul has come out and made this change to the plan to move forward with it. I'll say this, people who like congestion pricing and want to see it happen are cheering right now because this was kind of the last possible moment that she could do this to actually make it possible or probable that this would survive under Trump, because Trump has said that he will say no to this and scrap it, basically the first week he's in office. So that's one thing. But I find it also remarkable that Hochul has essentially said that she was not playing politics when she, paused this in the spring and then has now brought it back in a different form. There was reporting that this was because she really wanted to bolster the chances of House representatives in sort of swing or suburban districts in New York. I think that's where you hear the most pushback to congestion pricing, because those are the folks who maybe are driving in and not wanting to pay a toll. As we know, yes, New York had a lot of success in those swing districts, and a lot of folks did win some seats that fit that description, but the House is in Republican control anyway. So, politically, that didn't seem to help all that much. But she says, no, I wasn't playing politics. This wasn't a political decision. There's nothing to be read in by the fact that, I paused this, a few months before the election and then restarted it a couple weeks after the election. But, this is an enormous thing for New York. For transit, this is going to bring billions of dollars into the MTA. For people who ride the subway, if it goes forward and it survives, it likely will have a huge impact on the operation of the trains. It remains to be seen how much it actually affects traffic on the streets, because she has made a change to lower the toll. We don't know how much of an impact it will actually have on congestion, because if the toll is lower, more people are willing to pay it, so they'll keep driving. So a lot remains to be seen with that. And it's a very interesting move by her.
Jonathan?
I think one thing to note, so in the Bronx, under the previous congestion pricing plan, traffic was actually expected to increase. And for that reason, and also, the history of asthma rates that the Bronx has had from the building of expressways across the borough, multiple elected officials and advocacy groups were either opposed to the previous plan or were skeptical of it entirely. And, there are also upwards of 150 million in environmental commitments that many environmental advocates felt didn't go far enough, but were in limbo with the congestion pricing pause. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes there. Some of those include, renovating parks and green spaces, electrifying diesel trucks at the Hunt's Produce Market, Hunts Point Produce Market, which brings in so much food, I think the most in any of location in the country. Measures like that are pretty critical to a lot of folks in the Bronx, and that's something that folks are keeping an eye on as this new deal gets finalized.
Katie, but what about the different layers of city politics and how this rolls out?
The mayor has not been completely in favor of congestion pricing. I know some of his staff has spoken out against congestion pricing, although Deputy Mayor Nyirazoshi was at the congestion pricing announcement praising it. Look, this New York City is one of the least car-dependent cities in the country. The previous model, $15 for most drivers coming in, predicted to reduce traffic in Midtown Manhattan, the central business district, by about 17%. I don't know if that is adjusted now with the $9. There's going to be more discounts, cheaper fares overnight and that kind of thing. Governor Hochul saying it was not a political decision doesn't really feel truthful to me. And I will say all of this might be for nothing because President-elect Trump, as soon as Governor Hochul made the formal announcement about bringing congestion pricing in early January, he sworn in a few weeks later and he said that he thinks it's horrible. And he called it one of the worst taxes in womankind. I think making an appeal to the governor who's a woman. And again, I don't know. I think he can just pull it. So a lot of these things I see with politics now as we're facing a second Trump administration. A lot of politicians, I don't think they think they can continue to do things the way they used to do it and the way they believe they can do it. But announce a congestion pricing when the president might just end it anyway. And I don't know what the plan is there. And I don't know how the state individually can fight the president of the United States against this. But all the political layers and the months-long pause, our colleague Jose Martinez asked her today what the pause was about. She said it was a pause. It almost becomes comical, her love of diners and that kind of thing. So there's a lot that went into it. And it does seem strictly political.
Katie Honan, Rachel Holliday Smith, and Jonathan Custodio from the city, editors and reporters there. Thank you all for joining us.